Romans 9, verse 19. God governs the world unjustly. And this can cover all the objections that God governs this world in a way that we deem not fair. Now we have the original Greek word order here, and we can see that basically what they're saying is, when they object to God, is that He's all powerful and He does what He likes. Whatever He wants to do, He does, and we are just simply like puppets. And if that's the case, you can't blame a puppet. You can't blame the pot if the potter made it into a vessel that is common or not noble. The fault lies with the potter. It's his fault or her fault. So God's unfair to blame us in the day of judgment, because He didn't give us mercy. He actually hardened our hearts. So it's almost like a portion of mankind God is showing mercy, and a portion of humanity God is hardening. So whoever He wills, that's who receives one or the other. And of course Pharaoh is held up as the example that God hardened his heart. So when Paul was preaching the gospel or sharing in churches, this objection must have been quite regularly coming up for Paul to record it in Romans, that people are guiltless because it's the all-powerful God who is hardening people's hearts or showing mercy. So ultimately it's the way God is governing the world. Now Paul addresses this issue by referring to a metaphor that a potter has the privilege and the right to choose how he governs the world. And we just have to take the assumption that the way God governs the world is just, but obviously to our appearances often it appears unjust. So that many people think that God does have the power, but He exercises it in an arbitrary way. Not only are some saved by the mercy of God, but He actually actively hardens the hearts of other people like Pharaoh. And there's a whole category of objections to the way God runs the world, such as suffering and innocent suffering. God's powerful enough to stop it, why doesn't He do it? All these objections can be removed with one simple little fact, that the potter is working with a lump of clay that is not the original good humanity, but a corrupt lump. So this removes the objection that God is not fair, because God has no obligation to sinful humans, any more than a potter should use a lump of clay that's no good. So the fact that the potter uses the lump of clay and is able to make vessels that are noble for noble use is an act of mercy and skill, obviously, and it's not injustice when He grants some to be made noble, because it's not an act of justice, it's an act of mercy. And God has the right, therefore, to exercise the mercy to whom He chooses, because He is God. And His mercy is granted, but not according to the strict dictates of justice. So we can't measure God's mercy by justice. It doesn't fall into that category, because we are all undeserving of any act from God other than judgment. So when God exercises His mercy, it's not subject to reproach, it's above reproach, because such an act does not come under an act of justice. It is above justice. It lays justice to one side. So true justice would be that God would destroy the entire corrupt lump of clay and start with a new one. And he did do with sinful humanity in the flood of Noah. He destroyed mankind, humankind, and started with the family of Noah. So God's mercy, although it is above justice, it's not dispensed in a way that is considered not fair. Because the cross is a clear example. God doesn't set justice aside. He just transferred the penalty to Jesus. So mercy is given by God, but not at the expense of justice, just beyond it. So Paul answers this objection that God's unfair in saying that God's not unfair. In fact, the guilty are not entitled to anything at all. And the thing is that what justice should do, if applied, would be to give them no mercy at all. So this is where the objection loses its foundation. God is not under obligation to grant us any mercy at all. And in fact, Paul does show that even those who have been hardened, God exercises great tolerance towards them and patience. So we can't say that even to those who are not recipients of mercy, that God has this belligerent or terrible attitude towards them. But the corrupt lump of clay that the potter works with, the potter is not under any obligation. The potter should throw that clay away. But in fact, by an act of mercy, God grants a portion of humanity his mercy, and he does this freely and justly and not in an arbitrary way. But we cannot judge God the way he governs the world, because the only obligation he has to humanity is to destroy it. We don't deserve mercy, so we don't have any grounds for any objections towards the way God governs the world.